And welcome. Our top focus at this hour. On the 24th of February 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine. 1 year on, the war continues with thousands of lives lost, cities turned into ruins, and lives of Ukrainian residents turned upside down. 1 year ago, Russian President Putin announced a special military operation in Ukraine. Putin's aim was to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine, a former Soviet country. Ukrainians flagged Putin's aim to erase their 1,000-year national identity, and a stiff resistance began taking shape. Today, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky pledged to push for victory this year.
I want to address those who are still waiting, our citizens who are now under temporary occupation. Ukraine has not abandoned you, has not forgotten about you, has not given up on you. One way or another, we will liberate all our lands. We will do everything for Ukraine to return. And to all those who are now forced to stay abroad, we will do everything for you to return to Ukraine. We will do everything to make it possible. We will fight and bring back every single one of our captive soldiers. Only all this together will be a victory.
Since then, Ukraine managed to reclaim some of the lost territory. Western countries came together to back Ukraine. They gave and pledged billions of dollars of military aid and humanitarian aid, while organizations pledged investment towards the destroyed or lost infrastructure. And as both the sides are expecting a possible spring and summer offensive, the United Nations voted overwhelmingly to demand Russia immediately and unconditionally withdraws its troops from Ukraine. Ukraine earned a strong backing in a non-binding vote where 141 member countries voiced support for the resolution. 7 opposed it, while 32, including China and India, abstained. India's permanent representative to the United Nations, Ruchira Kamboj, says the resolution wasn't enough to achieve the goal of a lasting peace. However, India said it will always call for dialogue and diplomacy as the only viable way out to the conflict. But Russia dismissed the resolution, with its United Nations representative, Vasily Nebenzia, calling Ukraine neo-Nazi and accusing the West of sacrificing the country and the developing world in their desire to beat Russia. Meanwhile, the United States announced an additional $2 billion in security assistance to Ukraine. White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan also said G7 nations will announce on Friday a new round of sanctions against Russia. The sanctions will include countries that are trying to backfill products that are denied to Russia. When he was asked about the F-16 jets, which Kyiv requested to resist the possible Russian offensive, he said F-16s are not a question for the short-term flight and fight. F-16s are a question for a long-term defense of Ukraine. During the G7 meeting, UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak urged the allies to move faster in order to provide arms to Ukraine. The United Kingdom has been Ukraine's most prominent ally since its conflict with Russia. United Kingdom, being a key member in NATO and the G7, has also echoed UK's call to provide jets and tanks. Meanwhile, the first batch of Leopard 2 tanks have been delivered to Ukraine by Poland. The news was confirmed by a Polish news agency. Later today, Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki will announce the delivery of the German-made tanks. Now, according to experts, Western weapons can turn the course of the war for Ukraine, as it has already proven its battlefield capabilities when in August, a better armed Ukraine launched a southern counteroffensive around Kherson, the only land gateway to Crimea. Remember, Crimea was annexed by Russia in 2014 and hosts its Black Sea Fleet. On November 9th, Russia ordered forces to abandon Kherson, the only regional capital it had taken so far in its invasion. And for more on this, our correspondent Anas Malik is now joining us live from Kherson. Anas, you have toured several cities that were affected by the conflict. Some still remain in the ruins, like Kherson, where you are. Tell us what you see around you, and what is the situation in the city that you are currently in 1 year on?
Well, the situation behind me, probably the viewers can see, it's almost, it depicts of destruction that has been caused. This city was under Russian occupation for about 9 months, Eric, and what you see are damaged buildings, damaged houses, damaged apartment complexes, residential complexes, and this is in main Kherson city. Across it is the Dnieper River as well, and across that river we're still hearing that shells have been fired. Even while you were asking me that question, we can still hear shells falling in a distance, not here where we are, but not far from where we are either. It's still happening in the Kherson Oblast, and currently, it won't be wrong to say that this place is a ghost town. By all means, it is a ghost town. We're barely seeing any traffic on the roads. The markets are closed. The shops are closed. More so, there are only journalists who you would be spotting on the road here to do their professional duties. Just this morning, earlier where you are live from, just this morning we had rockets falling into Kherson city itself. I showed you that earlier in the day when we were live then. And shards of rockets. So the situation remains grim even now. The Ukrainian army has been giving a pushback. The people remain indoor and fearing that there can be another offensive. We've been speaking to people off the camera. They're not very wary of speaking on the camera, and they say that that they came out spontaneously on the 11th of November last year, when the Russian side had announced that it is withdrawing, and the Ukrainian forces had taken or recaptured the city of Kherson and the Kherson Oblast itself. But by and large, there's this sense of fear, tension that remains here in the southern city of Kherson, which is across the Dnieper River, and the Dnieper River, that's about 2,200 kilometers long, flows from western Russia, enters to Belarus, and from Belarus to Ukraine and onwards to the Black Sea. This is a strategically important city as well. So lots of stakes here, and currently, a year on, this remains more so to do more like a ghost town. Eric?
Live from Kherson, Ukraine, our correspondent Anas Malik. Anas Malik, stay safe and thank you. Let's continue talking about the commemorating of the first year anniversary of the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. Volker Stanzel is the former German ambassador to China and Japan. He is also a senior distinguished fellow at SWP. Volker is joining us live from Berlin. Volker, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
In your own words, how would you evaluate the conflict this far?
It is, on the one hand, a disappointment that the war still rages on. On the other hand, it is extremely positive that Russia has not achieved any of the kind of goals that it went to war for. So my perspective is the war may last longer, but maybe, as President Zelensky hopes, not much longer than 1 more year.
Volker, some critics say or may argue that not a lot will change this year. The escalation will be more and bloodier, like you mentioned there, because both parties are not willing to stop and talk. What role should the West, and that includes Germany and France, play going forward, since dialogue seems like a facade?
Yes, is it a facade? That's the question. I mean, Western leaders have spoken to Putin personally and other Russians frequently, so there's no lack of dialogue there. President Zelensky has already offered a peace plan last year, I think it was in March, which the Russians refused to even discuss. So the will for negotiations is there, but as long as Putin declares the goal of his war to be exactly the same as he announced on 24th of February of last year, there is, if you look at it realistically, very little that can be achieved by only declaring we're ready for talks. I mean, the Chinese have yesterday also joined the ranks of those who say we must negotiate. Of course, we must negotiate. This war can only end through negotiations. But as long as the battlefield situation is similar to, let's say, a war of attrition, and the same is true for the economic field in the area of sanctions, this looks like it is going to last on and on. And as I said, hopefully not longer than another year.
Now that you've mentioned China, you know, the country recently said that arming Ukraine or supplying weapons to both Ukraine and Russia will not end the war. What do you make of that statement?
Well, China, in all its statements so far, has very clearly taken Russia's side. And this is quite understandable, Putin being one of the closest allies of Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party. So it has not been a surprise that China was carefully, but still obviously taking Russia's side by attacking the United States, attacking NATO, attacking the West, and explaining that these countries were actually guilty for the war ever starting. So that was not a surprise. What I think is a little bit a surprise was yesterday's 12-point plan issued by the Chinese. Because on the one hand, they repeat the accusations of Western countries. On the other hand, it is quite clear that they try to enumerate a number of factors that could lead to a consensus over at least starting negotiations. And I think President Zelensky has judged it quite aptly when he said this 12 points proposal is a step in the right direction. It is a step in the right direction. China yet has to denounce Russia for even starting the war. That has still to come. But I think China is increasingly uncomfortable with the notion that this may be a war of attrition, because this war of attrition is not only on the battlefield, but as I said before, it's also happening in the economic, in the financial area, and that is something that the Chinese economy would have difficulty to stomach over a longer period of time.
Volker, finally, and I want your brief response on this one. In your own view, which country could be the best mediator in the war? India is hoping that through the G20, some sort of resolve will be reached. Do you agree?
Yes, the G20 is a good forum to prepare some representative of the G20 who has enough authority and reputation to step in as a mediator. Now, China's much too close to Russia. Who else is there? And if you look at big countries, I think, and I'm not saying this because I'm talking to an Indian TV station, it is true that India is well placed, because in so many ways it is, in its attitude, in its opinion, close to Western countries, but it has this traditional close relationship with Russia. I think chairing the G20 now, India would be well placed to try that.
Volker Stanzel, thank you very much for talking to WION today.
You're welcome.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.